This story's about a man named Brendan White, and how he went from an obscure insurance worker to a true champion of pro wrestling in a matter of years. That being said, Brendan isn't any of these people in the ring. Brendan White is somewhere in amongst the crowd, just another one of the adoring faces looking on as others live out their dreams in the middle of the Royal Albert Hall. But this story isn't about capitulating to the circumstances of everyday life, or wishing you could magically be dropped into someone else's success. It's about how Brendan White hit one of the lowest lows imaginable and decided to go from being just another watcher in the crowd to the main attraction of Welsh pro wrestling, and how he's dedicating his time to help others do the same. This is the story of Bronco Brendan White, the workhorse of Welsh professional wrestling. Brendan White was into pro wrestling since his early childhood, from the moment he watched the King of the Ring tournament as a kid, and it opened his eyes to a whole new world. He knew he loved the sport and would pretend to be a wrestler at home with his brothers whenever WWE was on the television. He was a backyard wrestler during his school days in a town called Blanai Gwent, going toe-to-toe with his friends for hours in their homemade rings, pretending to be their favourite wrestling superstars. Brendan didn't just have any old friends though. He was at school with future WWE sign-ups Wild Boar Mike Hitchman and Flash Morgan Webster. He credits his backyard wrestling with inspiring some of his moves in the ring to this very day. Brendan's own self-doubt in his ability started to show itself. He says that even though he loved wrestling, he never really thought he had what it takes to make a living from it, and so held himself back from going all in with his pro wrestling training. Brendan spent several years through his teens and early 20s, starting and stopping with his training. Looking back, he said that this inconsistency all stemmed from a lack of self-belief that he had what it took to step into a wrestling ring. This all came to a head in 2015. By this point, Brendan was a burnt-out insurance worker. He was diagnosed with testicular cancer and was forced to make a decision, asking himself, if it all ended tomorrow, would I have achieved everything I wanted to do in this life? And the answer was no. With a thankfully successful surgery and the chance to take redundancy and leave his job, Brendan was all in, chasing his dream of making a living as a professional wrestler. From then on, he made what he calls the happiest decision of his life, and started working towards his first real pro wrestling match, even though he had no idea where this path would take him. This decision meant going head-on against his self-doubts. He would have to fight against his self-limiting beliefs. He would have to find a way, or make a way, to get his pro wrestling debut. 1 year later, he was ready. Brendan White had been trained by his childhood friend, former WWE UK talent and standout pro wrestler, Wild Boar Mike Hitchman. He also credits quality British wrestlers like Mike Bird, Mark Andrews, Big Dog, Big Grizzly, and Flash Morgan Webster with helping him to get ring ready. Brendan first debuted as a cowboy character, fitting the Bronco name, but he now says this character choice was old-fashioned and well past its time, so moving swiftly on, he eventually came to the realisation that he was wrestling in the style of a much smaller person, usually to try to complement the build and style of his opponents in the ring. As time went on, he gained more and more self-belief to perform in a way that was more true to himself. His natural talent is moving people who don't want to be moved. So he started mixing a tougher brute force wrestling style with a new workhorse character, kept his impressive agile moves, and added some villainous craftiness to create his own original and believable character. He said he really worked on the storytelling aspect and character consistency in his matches. You can see this shift in Brendan's promo work and interviews, where he isn't afraid to be true to his character, even if it might rub someone the wrong way or insult an entire town.
Alright, great. I always it's been a pleasure this not being a bit, so see you later.
Thank you anyway, Brendan. Ladies and gentlemen, Bronco Brendan White.
Brendan was living on a high, living his dream, and feeling like he was constantly improving until he hit the year 2018. After overcoming the challenge to become a pro wrestler against all the odds, and then to work constantly at improving himself, Brendan White hit another period of self-doubt. He'd gotten about 100 matches under his belt by this point, and then says he just realised how bad he was, compared to more experienced wrestlers. Brendan got booked in a match with British wrestling veteran Pete Dunne, aka Butch. Pete Dunne is known by everyone across the British wrestling scene, and he's an established name for a reason. He brought 11 years of wrestling experience into this match in 2018. Brendan White said he could sense just how skilled Pete Dunne was during their match, and his mind was blown by the great finish that Dunne completely improvised. He resolved to keep training and wrestling even though he felt he had a huge mountain to climb to get his in-ring skills on a par with the veterans on the scene. I'm sure we all remember the events of spring 2020. The lockdowns, the uncertainty, the isolation. It was at this time that Brendan looked around, surveyed the landscape, and noticed that there weren't any gyms around him in South Wales where new wrestlers could go to get a structured training session. His friend Wild Boar was looking to sell the Dragon Pro Wrestling Academy that he ran out of Newport, South Wales, and thought Brendan would be the perfect guy to take it over. Under the ownership of Brendan White, Dragon Pro was rebranded as the New Wave Wrestling Academy, with highly skilled wrestlers like Wild Boar, Danny Luna and Danny Jones staying on as coaches. Brendan truly put his own money where his mouth is, using his own finances to buy and run the academy, and giving up his own time to train other wrestlers. At the very first New Wave Wrestling Academy training session, just one person turned up, and he went ahead with leading the session anyway. This was the moment he said he knew for sure that he loved wrestling and he had a real passion for teaching others. Brendan continued the academy's legacy under its revamped New Wave brand by running dedicated women's training sessions and guided beginners classes. He said his goal was to elevate New Wave Wrestling Academy into a feeder club for national and international wrestling promotions. Brendan's ultimate aim was to make a difference by creating the pro wrestling stars of tomorrow and promoting the talent on the Welsh wrestling scene. With the growing success of the academy training, there was talk that New Wave could do really well running its own live shows to give live show experience to its academy wrestlers. Brendan's self-doubts kicked in again, and he said that he'd never wanted to deal with the hassle of running a live wrestling show. But he also felt like he'd come this far in his career by taking the opportunities that came to him. So, even though he doubted himself somewhat, he tried running the first New Wave Wrestling show at Cardiff in September of 2022, and it was such a great success that they continued with the live shows on an ongoing basis. Even though it had felt like a failure back in 2018, Brendan's match against Pete Dunne had sparked the idea that novice wrestlers could make huge strides in their progress if they had the chance to wrestle people who were levels above them, experience-wise and skill-wise, in the ring. To this day, New Wave Wrestling Academy continues to run great shows with Brendan White, Danny Jones, Flash Morgan Webster and other stellar wrestlers performing on live shows with New Wave Academy's future stars.
This was the Dragon Pro Championship, the All Wales Championship. This represents respect. This represents hard work. And this is my championship, my title, and Pro Wrestling Chaos will recognise me as the All Wales Champion.
For me, the greatest example of Brendan White's journey from self-doubt to self-belief in his own wrestling ability can be spelt out by 4 numbers: 1154. This is the number of days that he held the All Wales Championship and was the main attraction of Welsh pro wrestling. 1,154 days. The longest ever All Wales title reign in history. Not only did he successfully retain this title for over 3 years, he completely changed the experience of what it means to be the All Wales champion. At the time Brendan won the belt, it was a title that was exclusively fought over in one South Wales town. He took the championship and revolutionised it, turning it into a prize that he proudly defended at wrestling promotions all across Wales and the southeast of England. He made sure that the Welsh fans knew, whether they liked it or not, that he was their representative All Wales champion, and the longest ever reigning All Wales champion at that. Even though he lost the championship in April 2023 to Danny Luna, by this time you would have to say that he'd really shown he could take any title and put his own stamp on it, and that he's not afraid to take on anyone in any place to defend his title reign. These days, Brendan White is still pushing for more and more success, wrestling as one half of the Greedy Souls tag team alongside his quality partner Danny Jones. These two are great as a tag team. They both play off each other's strengths, with Danny Jones as the technical bruiser and Brendan as the crafty powerhouse. They're being noticed across the UK and getting booked on shows for top international wrestling promotions in continental Europe. Brendan White's story shows that you really can take the wheel of your life at any point. It might just start with a delusional, childish dream and a decision to follow it, and a ton of hard work. He took one of the lowest lows imaginable and decided to use it as a springboard into doing things that made him happy and helped others. After taking that first leap of faith, then came the hard work, long days, taking any opportunity and just running with it. This is how Brendan White went from being just another face in the crowd to a bastion of the Welsh pro wrestling scene. To sum up, in Brendan's own words, if you love something, go for it and pursue it. Don't doubt yourself,